The film In Dubious Battles is a film set in the 1930s that shows the behind the scenes and what happens at a labor strike movement in the apple farms for increasing wages and payments to its promised amount. This film is based on the book written by John Steinbeck. So in this slide, I basically show like the big events in the film, such as organizing the strikes after the main characters Jim and Nolan have appeared in the apple pickers site where they try to get the pickers' opinions on their payment and their treatment and to organize the strike. In the second and the third was basically the confronting to the scabs, which are basically people that work during a strike and like changing their payments and the reason why they're doing the strike. And Joy, a friend of Mac, tried to explain the right of dignity and deserving the right pay, but ends in sadness when he is shot to death. This motivated Mac and Jim to push the upcoming strikers, in creating this. In the next picture, in the second column in the middle, it shows London, one of the pickers' leaders, being bribed or being convinced by a businessman and politician named Bolton to give up his land even though he didn't want to. And the next one is basically the consequences of not obeying the deal that he wanted to offer, which convinced the sheriff to go on the side of the businessmen due to the political power. And lastly was the death of James Franco's character Mac in fighting for their rights after being set up. So going back to the key points, I'm going to be more elaborate in talking about the events. So when organizing the strike, it was originally $3 a day that were supposed to be paid, but they were being paid $1 instead. So they had the choice, either you accept the payment or not, but if you don't accept it, you don't have a job. So after finding that out, Mac and Jim then decided to go to the apple picking site and receive the opinions of the other workers, which led them to the idea on what to fight for in their strike. London was convinced about their idea of the strike after receiving their help in the birth of his daughter-in-law, Lisa. And because of Joy's death of fighting for what is right, it actually convinced the pickers, to become strikers into fighting for their rights. Another key point in this film was political domination. As I mentioned earlier, Bolton was a businessman and a landowner who tried to sell London a position if he agreed to take out his workers. But then London disapproved because he knew the value and the cost of his workers, knowing that without the job they would have nothing, and he did create already established bonds with them, and they already gave him a reliance and trust on London. Also, another political domination is that because Bolton was a man who had a little more power than these workers, he convinced the sheriff, due to his that the pickers' strike included violence, trespassing, and because the pickers had no power, they had suffered and they had no choice but to obey and follow. Another situation in this film was communism. It says that if you're a striker, you're considered as Reds, or the right term is communist. But if you're in the strike itself, the scabs were considered to be betrayers into the other side, meaning there's a rat or a tattletailer in your union. And then the results of the strikes is that most of them majority failed because, of course, no power, and it wasn't really organized, and it led to violence. Because of this, the Fair Labor Act and Wagner Act was created. The Wagner Act protects the rights of workers to organize, bargain collectively, and strike. The Fair Labor Act establishes minimum wage, overtime pay, record-keeping, youth employment standards affecting employees in the private sector and in federal, state, and local governments. So for the personal connections, I actually connected this film into an actual activist. His name was Cesar Chavez. He was fighting for labor, also for labor working rights, but in the grapeyards, in the vineyards. I apologize. And he was actually a labor worker and an activist. Compared to this film, they were actually organized in a firmed union. They actually knew the issue and supported on how to find a solution. Although the unions were attacked along with Chavez himself, he wanted to keep his union nonviolent so they won't get in trouble or discredited. He did this also by fasting for 25 days, which actually impacted the opinions of the different communities in supporting him. He actually looked for supporters through the communities and politics and traveled for his cause. For today's time, there was actually, before this decade, there was already the civil rights movement around the 1960s that were made to fight and establish laws to protect our rights without any power over other people. These were the women rights and the rights of work due to sickness or color. And also we have protests or that are more organized by event planning and then they prevent being radical or going into violence. We also follow now the Bill of Amendments, which was created in the beginning of the time of the United States, but now it's more established to our our current laws, and we have to really remember our Bill of Amendments so that we have our that because it's our right, especially freedom of speech. In Hawaii, recently there was no recent union strikes, but the recent one was the teachers union. They fought lately for the classroom condition, such as adding AC since it's hot in the classroom. It's not healthy for the students to be working in those conditions. And the strikes and protests in Hawaii goes towards more environmental and economics situations such as Mauna Kea because of its Hawaiian value to the Hawaiian Islands and also building creating buildings on land that is sacred. Also, economics situations goes toward into taxes and battles of minimum wage. Instead of forming strikes and protests, there are actually community and state conferences that include representatives to talk about the current issue they want to fight for. Overall, I really have enjoyed the film through its cast's acting and story plot. I've seen the power and the struggles of the workers. I felt the unfairness, especially when this film is not by race, but even your own color can betray or empower you. Some scenes were unclear and short, however, to get the full idea. But I'm glad the laws were made to protect the future workers. Their work was worth it. I just wish more films talked about the transition of history in America. That way we can see how much we should value our rights, and it will be an interesting way to present the event.